It's a great pleasure to be here. I'm here to talk about the backdrop to a decade of constant war. When we ordinarily conceptualize the 1% and the 99%, what do we think about, guys? Economic disparity, thank you. I'm here to talk about another schism, another remarkable divisive divide in our society against this backdrop of a decade of constant war. 1.4 million Americans serve in the active military out of a population of 313 million in the United States. By my calculation, that's less than 1%. And we have an issue here that is an impending moral crisis about how it is that we receive our returning veterans, how we understand them, how do we conceptualize how to deal with their reintegration. And it's not a question of mawkish sentiment or Veterans Day celebration. It's a matter of profound understanding and a matter of, I think, moral conscience and an imperative to the integrity of our society. We have a situation where we have seen too frequently the military of this society treated as sandpaper to be used and forgotten. And that can no longer happen. When I was the age of the students that I'm primarily teaching now at my university at Tufts, I was in Israel, and I had military training, I had sniper training, but I was essentially an American citizen, and my task at that point in the outbreak to the '67 war was to dig up parks for potential grave sites. When I came out of that circumstance, I came back to the United States to go to graduate school, and it was the period of the Vietnam War. And I experienced a radically different schismatic society. In Israel, there was a sense of cohesion and unity. Here in this country, there was fractiousness, and there was this ridiculous divide between the military and civilian population, and worse, disdain and a remarkable negative environment. When 9/11 hit, I was at that point and still am the director of the Institute for Global Leadership at my university. And we decided that we would continue with what we had done ever since our inception in 1985, 1986, to try to figure out a way to educate a new generation of innovative, intelligent leadership that would have a sense of respect for both the civilian and military sectors of our society, and that would try to innovate and think about outcomes that could be more vitiating and invigorating and respectful, transformative education. And so we created something called Allies. We charged our students with thinking about a framework that could potentially unite this country. Allies, here we are at an intellectual roundtable at the United States Naval Academy in Annapolis a few years ago. Allies is a framework that does the things you might anticipate, and there were lectures and symposia and what have you. But it was a situation of experiential education as well, and a challenge to ourselves to try to bridge and create a more cohesive sense of interaction, and to try to influence the trajectories of people who would go into service both in the military and in the civilian sectors of our defense and security establishments, with ethics, with a sense of purpose, and with a sense of a way in which to move forward. The human cost of war makes it all the more imperative that this happen. We have suffered in the Iraqi war, at least American casualties, and we cannot forget the Iraqi casualties, but the American casualties were in the neighborhood of 4,500. In Afghanistan, they're in the neighborhood of a little over 2,000. There are 50,000 fatalities in the context of those people who are both wounded physically and psychologically. We are dealing with traumatic brain injury. We're dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder. And we are dealing with astounding numbers of suicides and of people who are undiagnosed, because it's hard to figure out how to contend with the accountability here. We have a situation where the medical capacity of our military has actually brought us back many more people who would have been absolutely demolished in previous years, but it brings a burden to the society. It's estimated that in the next decades, in the next few decades, we will reach for the care of our wounded nearly $1/3 trillion. We spend annually $550 billion on our military ventures and $160 million on what is now euphemistically being called operation contingencies, which is a euphemistic word, again, for what used to be called, in the Bush administration, the war on terror. The money is there. The question is, how is it to be redeployed and reconceptualized? We have a situation where our veterans do not have social security benefits for their health care. They are dependent upon appropriations annually from our Congress, and so we need to be a vigorous public in the context of making sure that these funds are accessible. We have a situation where we really need to rethink our national security imperatives as well. Allies has an opportunity, and this is, again, chapters at the Naval Academy, at the Air Force Academy, at West Point, at Tufts, and other liberal arts universities. We have an opportunity because there is a new dimension of thinking about strategic thinking, which we as a citizenry, civilian and military alike, need to understand. 65 years ago, we had George Kennan, then the Deputy Chief of Mission in Moscow for the United States at the time of the Soviet Union. He wrote his Mr. X article anonymously, which gave us deterrence and containment as our strategic profile for many decades. And now we have Mr. Y. Puck Mickleby in the rear in civilian uniform, a retired colonel in the Marine Corps, and in the forefront, Wayne Porter, who's an Allies enthusiast, a gentleman who, as you can see, chairs a new center set up by Mike Mullen, the former head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, at the Monterey Naval Postgraduate School, a center for systemic strategy and complexity. We need, as a society, to take seriously what Mr. Y is about. It's a call for an ecological, systemic sense of integrating education in this country, renewable energy, a different way to understand the integrity of our society and the preparedness of our youth for the technological and military challenges ahead of us, but also one which is very careful about engagement, very careful about intervention. And I would really recommend that you try to find out what this Mr. Y document is about. It was promulgated by the former dean at the Woodrow Wilson School at Princeton, Anne Marie Slaughter, when she was at the State Department for Plans and Policy. So Allies is indeed a classroom for leadership into the future. We hold an integrated set of events, forums, symposia, which you might imagine, interactions at West Point at all of the academies. We began this actually in 1985-86 when the first year of our institute brought West Point cadets for our first forum on international terrorism. And people wondered why we were having an international symposium on terrorism in 1985. We are dealing with conundrum issues. We have held forums at the Law Library of Congress, giving voice to the military who could not look at WikiLeaks because it would be allegedly a national security threat for them, or would compromise them. Forums on torture and Guantanamo, when the military was seriously against the types of interrogations that were going on for fear of what would happen with our own POWs. Forums on the imperial presidency, on the War Powers Act, all sorts of issues of human and civil rights that were not antithetical. National security and human civil rights are not antithetical. It's just how we approach our issues. And we need an ethical leadership to contend with this. And we have met remarkable individuals over the years, I'm just choosing two here, who have influenced us and we have influenced. So this is Lieutenant General Dirk Jameson, in charge of our ICBM forces for many years, who is now working with a civilian professor, Wendell Wallach, who is the chair of technology and ethics at Yale University, to try to put into place an ethical code for the use of autonomous killing vehicles, drones. And on the right, the commander now of the U.S. Rangers, Bill Osland. Here is Bill in civilian attire with two of our alumni, Ezra Barzilay, the lead epidemiologist for the Centers for Disease Control, in charge of global health reconstruction, who's in charge of the surveillance of cholera in Haiti. And If you're facing on the right-hand side Nick Birnbach, who won the Elie Wiesel Award for Humanitarianism as a UN peacekeeper in Dili, East Timor, when he was told to evacuate the thousands of people, or told rather that he could not evacuate the thousands of people under his protection, that the staff of the UN peacekeepers would be airlifted out of Dili, East Timor to the northernmost city of Australia at that point, Darwin. He wrote back and said, sorry, this is not the survival of the fittest. When he was told he could take 200 people, he said, screw that. This is not Schindler's List. And he organized the UN peacekeepers to give up their life insurance, sent it back to headquarters, and made the people at headquarters realize they had a moral dilemma on their hands, and they evacuated everybody. They sent back their note saying that they would give up their UN-mandated life insurance policies and suffer the fate of the people who were inside their compounds, fleeing the death squads at that particular point. Ethical, normative leadership. And we work internationally. This gentleman is the former commander-in-chief of the Israeli Navy, Admiral Ami Ayalon. And if you want to talk about dynamism, he is now in charge with Sari Nusseibeh of an effort called the Grassroots Peace Project to try to do something different rather than what we're facing right now with Hezbollah and Hamas and Israel. And we work internationally. This is the judge who had the courage to prosecute the Chilean dictator Pinochet. And he invited our ally students to work with his students, the militarized Carabinero, militarized police, and the Chilean military to develop for the first time a human rights curriculum in the aftermath of the dirty war in the Cone at the Catholic University of Santiago. The young girl in the white in the front right now has the TED franchise in, of all places, Kabul. And we have been invited into Rwanda at the invitation of the Rwandan government and the Rwandan Peace Academy to create an allies chapter in Rwanda to figure out how to possibly deal with reintegration of their society in the aftermath of the genocide. This young woman was a Tufts student who was the person who actually you could watch on CNN because she was responsible for initiating the idea that went up to the head of the US Air Force to redeploy her work, which she's a drone pilot, to oversight what was going on in the rescue capacity in Haiti. This is a particularly poignant slide as I can begin to conclude. Ben Sclaver, Tufts undergraduate, Fletcher School graduate. He cared about refugee work and dealing with chronic health issues caused by water. He became a captain in the US Army, and when he was deployed to northern Uganda, he set up a foundation called Clearwater, an NGO, which deals with these very, very issues. He was then redeployed to Afghanistan, and sadly was killed by a suicide bomber on October 2nd, 2009. We honor him, and there are internships now available to allies and others throughout all of our chapters to serve in Clearwater in northern Uganda. And there is an actual internship at the Stockdale Center for Ethical Leadership at the Naval Academy. I can't tell you about a number of people who I think would be illustrative. Well, I will. I can't show you the images of some people who I think would be illustrative of what we are trying to accomplish. The young boy who left his PhD studies at Oxford to enter the SEALs in the aftermath of the Madrid bombing. The young lieutenant, a female lieutenant who was now tasked to the Special Navy Warfare Development Center in Virginia Dam to join the SEALs, the unit of SEAL Team 6, the same unit that took down bin Laden, to work as the deputy for strategic planning for the Special Forces. But I can do this, and I'll conclude with this. This is the mystery woman, if you can see the face behind the red circle. This is the woman the blogs were sort of alive with, wondering who the hell this was. They recognized Hillary Clinton and certainly Biden and Obama, et cetera, et cetera. This was the iconic photograph on the front pages of our newspapers as they watched live the deployment of the SEAL team to try to capture bin Laden. And they wondered if the girl in the back was the person who was bringing the Starbucks. No, she's Audrey Thomason, and at age 34, she was head of counterterrorism for the National Security Council. Allies has had an impact all these years. We hope this goes viral. We're asking for the ways in which we can think about the intelligent manners that we can overcome the civil-military divide to create this kind of innovative and ethical leadership. And we need you as an informed citizenship to think about the new security imperatives and to support the people who are put in harm's way and to make sure fundamentally that we do not deploy our military because our civilian sector does this into the future, and to make sure that our civilians are not the people who are, let me put it tactfully, messing with the Constitution so that the soldiers who serve us so valiantly are not put into compromising situations. Thank you very much.